Mic check, 1, 2, 3. Mic check, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this first meeting of the Board of Health to order. I'll briefly introduce myself to those who don't know me. My name is Matthew Trenham. I am the city clerk here at the City of Hamilton, and I am appointed board secretary for the Board of Health. Just making sure everything is properly muted here. Okay. So as we do have quorum present for today's meeting, again, I'm calling the meeting to order. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. We're going to move on to approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? I see Councillor Wang, Councillor Kretsch. Are there any amendments from board members? Changes to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor to approve the agenda? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, seeing none, we will now move on to item 5.1. It is the Board of Health orientation. Again, for all those watching, I am currently chairing this meeting as we do not have a chair yet for this new board. As the board is brand new under the legislation, we'll move through this orientation. I will call upon Dr. Richardson, our Medical Officer of Health, just to introduce this item and the presentation.
Good morning, everybody, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the historic moment that we're in with the first meeting of the Semi-Autonomous Board of Health for the City of Hamilton Health Unit, which is the formal name of this group now. We have for you this morning Karima Kanani, who is, of course, a familiar face as we've moved through this process now for the last I think almost 3 to 4 years. 4 years, I think ago, as Karima first started helping council understand what this transition could look like. She's a partner with Miller Thompson, and she had assisted with a number of education sessions through the early stages of deciding the process and whether to move forward with this semi-autonomous board. And she's been assisting the steering committee, which consists of Grace Mader, City Solicitor Lisa Shields, and Matthew Trenham, our city clerk, and Brian McMillan has joined as our financial representative. So Karima has assisted as outside counsel in pulling together the foundational documents that you'll see before you today. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karima to give a little orientation now as to what it means to be the semi-autonomous Board of Health for the City of Hamilton.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richardson. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here today at this inaugural meeting. As Dr. Richardson mentioned, this is a very momentous occasion for this group. We had begun discussions at City Council on public health reform a few short years ago, and that has culminated in this moment today where we are having this inaugural meeting.
Over to Karima to give a little orientation now as to what it means to be the semi-autonomous Board of Health for the City of Hamilton.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I've paused there, Matt, because I have some feedback and repeat on the WebEx of...
We did hear in the room as well, Karima. We're just correcting that. 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, I think we've got it if you'd like to proceed.
Okay, thank you so much, Matt. So once again, pleasure to be here. Let's dive into the material. We have very short time together. I'll take the next slide, please. We're going to do a very quick recap on how we have found ourselves here. As I mentioned, it has been a journey over a period of time. City Council was very committed to public health reform, and our early discussions began around how to create greater inclusivity and connection with the community voice in public health in Hamilton. And there's been quite the journey in that regard, resulting in this new Board of Health today. So we'll talk about what's happened and how that happened. The meaning of that is that all of you are now constituting the Board of Health. That is actually quite significant under the law. And so I want to spend a few minutes together with you today talking about what it means to be the Board of Health for Hamilton and what are your duties and responsibilities now collectively as a group and also individually as members of the board. This is a semi-autonomous Board of Health. That means there is a continued relationship with the city. And so we'll talk a little bit about what is the continued role of Hamilton City Council. And then last, we will talk about transition to the new Board of Health and the approvals that you are going to be asked to provide today in order to set up the foundation and enable the Board of Health to go forward. I'll take the next slide, please. Hamilton Board of Health has, for many, many years, been what we call a single-tier municipality Board of Health. Basically, that means City Council was the Board of Health, and they had the powers and duties to act in that capacity under the Health Protection and Promotion Act from the City of Hamilton Act that gave the city those powers, rights, and duties. Well, as of June 5th, City Council ceased to be the Board of Health. One of the key points that I want you to take away as a group today is that this was done through a change in law. Through the provincial legislature and the More Convenient Care Act, which became effective on June 5th, the City of Hamilton Act was amended, and it repealed and replaced Section 11 of that act, which had given those powers to the city. This change in law established the new semi-autonomous Board of Health for the City of Hamilton. At the same time, in this legislation, so embedded directly in the law, are what are the new roles for both City Council and the Board of Health working together in collaboration in public health in Hamilton. Now, to ease the transition from being operated through the city to now being operated independently under the Board of Health, there are certain support transition provisions that are contained in the Act. I won't get into all of the legal nitty-gritty detail for you today, but you should simply know that there are enabling provisions that will ensure the stability of public health service operations in Hamilton. This includes in respect of current public health service employees, as well as all contracts, agreements, and approvals previously entered into by the city. Next slide, please. Under this new provisions under the City of Hamilton Act, the city, as I mentioned, continues to have a significant role as it relates to the Board of Health. And one of those key roles is to determine the composition of the board and to appoint members to the new semi-autonomous Board of Health. And City Council has already done this. 2 resolutions were passed. The first confirmed the composition of the Board of Health as being 6 members of council, 6 members of the public, and an education representative. Well, that should sound familiar to you because that is the composition of the subcommittee that was originally struck to provide input to the city as the Board of Health. And so the city has gone one step forward to say that that public health subcommittee, your group, your table, has now been officially appointed as the members of the inaugural semi-autonomous Board of Health for the 2022 to 2026 term of City Council. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? It's quite a significant change. What you were sitting as previously was as a subcommittee of the Board of Health. That meant you provided input, you provided recommendations, specifically on topics where you were requested to do so by the Board of Health at the time being City Council. With this change in law, you are no longer a recommending body. You are now the decision-making body. you have assumed the role of the Board of Health for the City of Hamilton. With that comes a whole host of new duties and responsibilities as a board. And where do we find those? They're actually scattered among a number of different places, and we'll take you on a very quick tour today. This will no doubt be a topic of continued education for this group as you go through settling in as the new Board of Health. Your sources of rules, responsibilities, and duties are the Health Protection and Promotion Act, the Ontario Public Health Standards, the Municipal Act, the City of Hamilton Act, and your own bylaws, policies, and procedures. So quite the list. Well, let's do a quick recap of what that means. I'll take the next slide, please. The Health Protection and Promotion Act is the governing legislation for all boards of health for public health units across Ontario. There is where you will find the duties and responsibilities of the Board of Health. And the Board of Health, meaning all of you, now have oversight of public health programs and services, community health protection, and communicable disease in the City of Hamilton. You'll fulfill these duties by delegating certain responsibilities to your key officer in public health, being your medical officer of health. The medical officer of health under the law is responsible for the management of public health programs, services, and employees. And your medical officer of health, Dr. Richardson, will report directly to you as the Board of Health on issues that are related to public health concern, public health programs, and services. This all comes directly from the legislation. Next slide, please. There are some extra rules, requirements for programs, services, and accountability that are found in the Ontario Public Health Standards. I don't have time in the short time that we have together today to do a deep dive with you into the standards, but they are homework reading for all of you because they are an important read. Some key points that I want you to take away just for today's purpose is that the Board of Health is to comply with these public health standards and requirements for programs and services, and that within these standards, you will find expectations and accountability for good governance to ensure effective functioning of the board and of public health. It also requires that you establish bylaws and policies on a variety of matters. And you're going to hear a little bit about that today. It will be a continued conversation. Next slide, please. But not only do we have the HPPA as your governing legislation, as a semi-autonomous Board of Health, you also are subject to the Municipal Act, and both of these pieces of legislation must be read together. Under the Municipal Act, anywhere where you see a reference to a local board, you are one of those local boards. And there is a variety of requirements under the Municipal Act that apply to local boards, unless it states otherwise. There will be some places where it will say, these are rules for local boards, but it does not apply to the Board of Health. And so it's important as you are governing your role as leaders of the board and of public health in Hamilton, that you are aware of and looking at both of these sets of legal requirements going forward. Next slide, please. Now, not only have you taken on a leadership role as the Board of Health for public health in the City of Hamilton, but as a semi-autonomous Board of Health, you will fulfill that role by working together in collaboration with the city and specifically City Council. When the City of Hamilton Act was amended to create you as the Board of Health, it defined what will be the continued role of City Council going forward. That means that certain parts of the Health Protection and Promotion Act, the HPPA, will not apply in this context because you are semi-autonomous. And I want to underscore here that the semi-autonomous model is a more unique model in the province. There are only 2 others. You are the third. And in these models, certain provisions are retained by City Council as their authority. City Council establishes the size of the board and appoints its members. They have appointed all of you. City Council will also appoint, reappoint, and dismiss Medical Officer of Health, Associate Medical Officers of Health, and the Auditor. The City of Council is to provide the Board of Health with the public health employees that the City considers necessary for the Board to carry out its function. And City Council may request the Board of Health to make recommendations on issues that remain within the City's jurisdiction that involve public health considerations. City Council may also request you, as the Board of Health, to make an annual report to Council on the Board's operations. Next slide, please. So when we bring all of that together, what is summarized here for you in a chart format is the overall accountability framework for how the Board of Health and Public Health will continue forward in Hamilton. So as I mentioned, under the City of Hamilton Act, Hamilton City Council has certain rights and responsibilities. I've reviewed those already with you. I won't repeat everything that's here on the slide, but this is a good takeaway for you. The Board of Health then has the oversight of public health programs and services, oversight of the Medical Officer of Health, and the Medical Officer of Health has a series of duties and responsibilities under the law, under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, where they will report then directly to the Board of Health on those matters. The Medical Officer of Health will also direct employees who are engaged in the delivery of public health programs and services with the support of the Associate Medical Officers of Health. And public health employees, those that were serving public health before this transition, will continue to serve public health during and after this transition, reporting into the Medical Officer of Health, although they will remain employees of the city. Next slide, please. That has been a very quick recap and summary for you of the legislative framework under which you have been created and through which you will continue to operate forward as the Board of Health. This will not be the first time that you have this conversation. There is much to unfold in terms of the new role of the Board of Health in the City of Hamilton, but there are certain foundational governance documents that are essential and are necessary in order for the Board of Health to go live and in order for it to be able to function going forward. So today you will be introduced to those documents and you will be requested to approve them. Once you approve them, they are not set in stone. As the Board of Health, these will be your governing documents, and you can continue to evolve these documents as you continue to evolve your role over time. There will be more to come. This is just the beginning of the discussion. As we continue forward, there will be additional processes, policies, and procedures that will need to be established, working collaboratively as the Board of Health and the City of Hamilton in order to ensure that you are meeting standards of good governance and best practices for collaboration of city and community in leading public health in Hamilton. We can stop the share here on the slides, and I'm pleased to receive any questions if there are.
Thank you, Karima. Very much appreciated for that overview. I will now take questions to the presentation. We'll start with Councillor Cratch.
Thanks very much for the presentation. A lot of it isn't news, but it's important to have the context. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I think the question that remains for me after listening to you is with respect to this point you make about collaboration between the Board of Health and City Council. As a city councilor, I can't actually imagine what that looks like, because right now, before today, we were reporting directly to city council. Council was rising as the Board of Health. Council was considering the recommendations directly and so on. Of course, there's going to be some play between the things where council is responsible still, and the Board of Health will receive information about those kinds of things. But how do you imagine that actually works on a functional level day to day?
Yeah, so we have two excellent models of that in the province, in both Toronto and Ottawa, that have been operating through semi-autonomous boards of health for some time. And over time, that will be a change at the City of Council table, where City Council has been used to for many years, sitting as the Board of Health, functioning as the decision maker on public health matters. The legislation is very clear that as it relates to jurisdiction on matters related to public health decision-making, those will now reside with the board. But there is a very close synergy in terms of the supports that are offered, the services that are offered through the city in order to support the functioning of the Board of Health, as well as the various rights and obligations that continue to reside with the City Council table. So including as it relates to employees, as it relates to the medical officer of health, and as it will relate to budgeting processes as well. And so there will be the need to determine how both the Board of Health and the city are going to work together in that regard, in terms of the processes that you will engage in and the procedures that you will follow to ensure that the input appropriately is being drawn in from both sides to function together as a unit in advancing public health.
Thanks.
Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Karima, for your presentation. Similar to Councillor Crutch's question, I think I'm going to be a little more pointed. How does conflict resolution work in this instance when we have a public health unit, a Board of Health that makes decisions, that determines policy and procedures, and yet we also have a City Council that also determines policy and procedures at a city level? Most recently, we went through the municipal alcohol policy, which was not awesome. That was something that I just don't understand how we actually resolve a conflict like that. Who is ultimately the decision maker? How do we resolve conflict in that sort of situation?
This is an excellent question, and I think that the fact that you're asking these questions bodes well for reflecting on the work that needs to continue to be done to establish an effective semi-autonomous Board of Health framework. The first answer that I would give you in that respect is that although there is collaboration that will enable an optimized model, legislation is also clear as to those matters that are within the jurisdiction of the Board of Health and those that are in the jurisdiction of the city. Matters that are within the jurisdiction of the city will continue to be the ultimate authority of the City Council. Those that are within the jurisdiction of the Board of Health will be the ultimate decision maker. You gave an excellent example of one of those situations where that nexus and synergy of creating collaborative decision-making will enable decision-making to occur with the least amount of conflict, ideally as possible. However, where there is conflict, you want to ensure that as we develop policies and processes, we're looking very clearly at what are the procedures for sharing respective views on matters where there is crossover between city and the Board of Health, while still respecting the law as to the ultimate decision maker on the topic at hand.
Thank you. I think as a follow-up question then, I understand what you've just said. I think that ultimately I would like to understand, what does a process for conflict resolution potentially look like? Should we have, even though it is very clear in terms of the legislation where responsibility lies, but as we have seen with our most recent example, there was so much backlash that it ended up being, I just don't understand what the policy or the process is for us to get to a conflict resolution sort of framework. And is that something that we determine here as the new Board of Health, or is that something that ultimately the Municipal Act overrides all of these challenges?
That is something that you have the ability in a semi-autonomous model to co-create. And so this is where I talk about there will be continued work. You know, at an initial meeting, we're bringing forward foundational bylaws. What will really be critical will be the design of these processes and how you move forward. As it relates to matters that are under jurisdiction of the Municipal Act or under jurisdiction of the HPPA, those remain as they are as ultimate decision makers. And I think it will be to council and to the Board of Health to determine the leadership that each entity would like to demonstrate as to the level of collaboration and integration that you would like to have as you move forward in decision making. You know, the fact that you're asking about conflict resolution processes reflects very positively on the desire to have some process through which there is integration and discussion occurring together in the best interests ultimately of the city and its residents. Partly, this will be done at the staff level. So recognize that there is a difference between decisions that will be made through the medical officer of health and her staff working together in collaboration with the city and administration versus those that we consider to be governance level decisions that would actually reside with the Board of Health and in the role of City Council from a governance perspective on city matters. So there's no change as to the nature of what is considered governance level decision making of what would come up to the board. There will equally be collaboration that will occur at the operational level. And Dr. Richardson can perhaps speak more to some of the committee structures that are currently being explored to create forums for that dialogue and discussion to take place.
Thank you. That answers a lot of my questions. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Just going to add a couple of comments around the municipal alcohol policy piece in particular, and that's a terrific example of this piece where it's actually council's policy. And I think there was some confusion on the day about whether it was a public health policy versus a municipal policy that applies to the city. And so in those cases, as Kareem is pointing out, you know, there's clear jurisdiction. That was a municipal policy. But there are many of those that that staff from Public Health Services that have been either leading on behalf of the city or collaborating in other structures that are reporting in through other committees or departments. And so we'll need to look at those ones where we've had the leadership role and make sure we're clear about how that's going to move forward. And so the community heat response strategy is another one, for example, where one might say, well, where should that go? Should that continue to come through what was Public Health Steering Committee or Subcommittee? Or should that now go through another committee, for example, because it is, again, a municipal policy overall, which public health collaborates with. But life isn't so distinct, as we know. There are many things that the Board of Health will have an interest in or want to comment on or advocate for. And I think as we work this out in terms of the relationship between the city, our partner in all of this, and with whom we want to have this ongoing collaborative relationship, you know, how do we establish those ways of working? One of the things we are doing is this steering committee, which will stay in place for now to support the shared services model that we've adopted. And so this relates to many of the things that you begin to see in the delegation bylaw, but the legal services, the financial services, the IT services, all of those things. And so that group is particularly there to support those services. But we'll need to have several more conversations as part of this transition process. It's not done today. It's going to take some work to make sure. I've got a list here of about 13 items. I just added this one into about conflict of interest or conflicts resolution. And that we'll have to come back with and discuss and talk about how it's going to work. So it's a process, and this one's gotten added onto the list.
Anything further, Councillor? Okay, I see Member Danko.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the presentation. It's an exciting step forward. In line with the questions that we've heard, I would imagine now that we're in a position where we have to set a budget. And that, I know from being on another board, takes a significant amount of time. The budget also is going to be informed by whatever's allocated from the city, from City Council. And so I'm wondering, how we are envisioning that playing out, what supports would be provided in terms of financial staff. I would imagine that we don't want to duplicate staff and duplicate roles between the city and the Board of Health because there's a cost associated with it. But I'm just imagining that we may have the ability to direct funds in terms of, services that public health provides. And yet, if there was an initiative like a community heat response strategy, that actually would need to be funded at the city level. So I'm trying to figure out how those two things come together and how that's been working maybe with the other semi-autonomous boards of health. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'm just looking to the bench. I see Brian.
So through the chair, Brian McMullen, Director of Administration and Special Projects. Yeah, we've had those discussions internally, member Danko, and we are looking to clarify those. City of Hamilton has an existing budget process, and public health being part of healthy and safe communities. We're working on an internal schedule with that, with guidelines and targets for the budget. We've had discussions about when that information might be coming forward, and we'll continue to work on that process with the City of Hamilton, the city manager, and the mayor about because we do have some strong mayor's powers that we do have to consider this year. So the discussions have led to what kind of increase might be permitted or targeted, and what, as some of the councillors are raising too, what is that process, if there are conflicts between what the Board of Health requires and what the City of Hamilton is providing as a guideline. So those things are still being worked through.
And I'll just ask Dr. Richardson to add on there.
And as if it's not complicated enough in terms of just sorting out this transition, of course, there's also a number of budget processes that we flow through. And so, as Brian has said, we're working out the piece with the city and bringing forward a budget to this group this year for this term. There was a lot of discussion with the speed of the transition when the legislation finally came through, and then where would it be in each of the processes that's happening. So staff have been working on the budget already, as they normally would do, and preparing. And so the plan would be to bring that back to this group, the overall public health services budget. There's also, and then it would go forward, as Brian is saying, go forward to the council process for consideration. If there were, you mentioned about extra funds, and if there were extra funds needed at that time or in year, those are our questions about, well, who might those funders be? And any time that it would be council, of course, that's council's decision in terms of those extra dollars. But there could be funding from other sources, and we do have about $2 to $4 million worth of funding, for example, right now from the federal government. And so those would come back to this group. The other thing we have, which you will have seen before, is the annual service plan and budget for most of our public health functions. And so that will continue to come through this board as well. It really hasn't changed in terms of the process. We've always had these dualities of process, and we've managed them for some time now, and we'll be working through exactly how they tie together under this structure. And from the staffing perspective, under the service level agreement that is being developed, or I should say renewed, between the city and public health services at this juncture, finance services will continue to be provided by the finance staff within corporate services. And so that is, there's no change from a staffing perspective, but that's part of these shared services that we have from the city to support the functions.
Thank you. Anything further, Member Danko?
Thank you so much.
Do we have any other questions to the presentation? Looking around the room and seeing online. Yeah, Councillor Taddison, please go ahead.
Just in terms of the remuneration policy, it says that it's in accordance with the Health Protection and Promotions Acts in terms of councillors that sit on this board do not receive remuneration. However, the chair, if they're a councillor, does. And I'm wondering if we had the ability to remove that stipend from the chair, if they are a councillor and sit in the chair position, or if that's part of the policy that says the chair must be remunerated even if they are a councillor.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll look to Karima first.
I think you may want to go to Dr. Richardson on this question.
Through the chair. So in terms of this policy, it does indeed follow the Health Protection and Promotion Act. I would say if there is a desire to change this policy, that does remain with the board to make decisions in relation to it, as long as it's consistent with the act. So I'm going to just turn to City Solicitor Shields and just see if she has any other comments in terms of that particular provision.
Through the chair, Lisa Shields, City Solicitor. So as Dr. Richardson indicated, it is in the act to allow for remuneration for the chair, even if that chair is a member of council. It's up to this board to decide whether or not they want to remove that requirement. It would not be in non-compliance with the act.
Okay, thank you then very much.
Are there any further questions to the presentation? Councillor Cretch for a second time.
Thanks very much. Just wanted to reply, since the topic came up now, and it may come up in the future if Councillor Tattison wants to make an amendment, but just that I'm totally in support of the chair not being remunerated if they're a member of council, but just also wanted to say out loud for the public record that many councillors are remunerated for their time on other boards. And so I think this seems to be a concern born out of the fact that councillors are being remunerated. I encourage any one of my colleagues to bring a motion forward, including Councillor Tattison, to the next council meeting, asking that all remuneration for councillors outside their salaries is cancelled. I know that what some people do right now is they give that money back, or they use it for certain specific things, but they don't have to give it back if they don't get it in the first place. So I have a list here. There's a report that comes to Audit, Finance, and Administration every year detailing all the remuneration councillors receive outside their role. So again, I think it's a fair point to make. Should apply across the board, I hope. So anyways, we'll see what happens at council next week.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think I'll just restate some of the comments that we heard, that given this is a separate board at this point, it would be a separate motion here if you'd like to amend it here. And then, of course, further to the other councillor's point, council can do what they would like for other boards and their remuneration that comes from the council decisions. But I'll call one last time for any speakers or questions to the presentation before we put the report on the floor. And seeing none, can I get a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor? This is report BOH 25018, Board of Health Bylaws, Policies and Orientation. I see Councillor Nan and I see Member Kirby for the seconder. Now, we have a number of recommendations on this. All of them are currently on the floor. What I'm going to suggest is maybe we just go through one by one if there are individual questions through those, if there are any amendments, as we've just seen that discussion. So maybe I'll start right away with the Board of Health Procedural Bylaw, recommendation number 1. Any questions to the procedural bylaw? Seeing none, we will look to the Board of Health Delegation Bylaw. Any questions? Anything to the Board of Health Remuneration Policy? I recognize Councillor Tattison.
I was just going to propose an amendment that all council members of the Board of Health, including a council member, no, sorry. Do you have it?
Yeah, I think just simply, Mark's looking at me, sorry. Just simply, I think that we all understand what's happening here is that if the council person is a chair, that the council person would not be remunerated for being the chair. Is that your point, Mark?
Yeah, so I basically am thinking all council members of the Board of Health, including a councillor that may hold the position of the chair, shall not receive remuneration for attendance at the Board of Health meetings.
Thank you, Councillor. So we'll take it that the Board of Health Remuneration Policy be amended, striking that portion as it relates to that, if everybody's comfortable with that wording.
I'll second it.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Tattison, seconded by Councillor Cretch. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a vote on the amendment to the policy. This will be an electronic vote for anyone who has access to eScribe at present. For those that don't, we'll just call you to raise your hands. I'll let you know once the vote is open. eScribe's just taking a moment this morning. It is Monday. Okay. E-scribe is taking longer than we anticipated. If you are in favor, please raise your hand. We have it open. So members of council, please vote. If you are not a member of council, please raise your hand if you are in favor. This is of the amendment to the Board of Health remuneration policy to exempt members of council from remuneration if they are serving as chair. So if you are a member without access to e-scribe at the moment, raise your hand if you're in favor of the amendment. And we will mark you in the attendance as such. Okay, anyone opposed to the amendment? Member Joseph? Okay. I have Member Kirby in favor, Member Danko in favor, Member Danko opposed, Member Joseph opposed.
Opposed? Thank you.
And that carries 9-3. Moving further down, are there any questions to the Board of Health travel expenses policy? And just lastly, any questions to the governance review? This is clause number 5 of the report. Councillor Wang.
Does this policy require us to add a line that talks about when we do this type of feedback? I'm thinking about the conflict resolution question I had asked earlier. And I'd like to understand, like, when would we see something like that as part of this particular appendix? Does it need to be revisited? Is there any type of cadence in terms of how we do that feedback mechanism? And I don't know if it requires documentation on this particular appendix at all. So that's my question.
And I'll start with Dr. Richardson.
Through the chair, so the item on the report, the recommendation, talks about a governance review, which is a bit of a more formal sort of structure around all of the foundational documents. The Ontario Public Health Standards actually require a Board of Health evaluation of their functioning every 2 years. And so we've been as staff trying to figure out how to fit this in as we go forward. And we think the best time to do that is next spring, as this board has had almost a year's worth of time thinking about its service and how it's been functioning, and then can reflect on that and make recommendations back to itself. And so that's a process that has happened before and will continue to happen as we go forward. We'll be bringing a report forward to the board in the early spring to just outline what our suggestions are for that evaluation, and then to see if there's anything else, and then we'll go through the process and bring back a report as to what the outcome was. So that will happen every 2 years, and then we're thinking of a more structured review of some of the foundational documents each midterm of the board, each midterm of council. And so there's an opportunity at each of those junctures, like every couple of years, to raise those. And of course, as we said earlier, if there's any desire to look at any of the foundational documents as we move forward, you can raise those at any time throughout the year. So I would think we'll look at, as I said, as a steering committee, we'll consider the information today and think about when that might be able to be worked through, and then come back to you with that piece, and then look at the reflections on it potentially next year.
So, Chair, is there any value to putting in just a line or some sort of wording on Appendix E that says that we will be doing that kind of work? It's just that on Appendix E, as the chart is very simple and to the point, but it doesn't actually say any of the things that you just said. So I wonder if there is any value in putting at least a line that says there is a potential for feedback or evaluation and blah, 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 blah.
Through the chair, and you could absolutely add in, and in fact, we actually as staff thought about adding that in, but after we'd had to submit the report, it was a bit quick getting through the process after the legislation passed. So absolutely, to add in that the board undertake its first self-evaluation process in the spring of 2026 and, reflect on its functioning as a new governing body.
Okay,
Could add that in.
thank you, Dr. Richardson. Chair, I'd like to add that as an amendment, and I hope you were able to capture what Dr. Richardson had kind of said.
I believe we have, and we'll add it as just another bullet point in that chart for Appendix E.
Yes.
So as an amended piece. Do we have a seconder for that amendment? Looking around, Member Joseph, thank you. Any discussion on the amendment? Amendment to recognize the more regular review of the public health processes as we move through. Seeing no comment, I will call the vote on the amendment. This will also be electronic. Vote is in progress. All those in favor, members without access to eScribe, please raise your hand so that the clerk's office can note that. I see 1, 2, 3. Councillor Kirby in favor. Councillor Danko, Member Danko in favor. Thank you, everyone. That carries 12-0. Any further discussion on the report? Seeing none, I will call the vote on the report. This is to receive report BOH 25018, Board of Health Bylaws, Policies, and Orientation, including the presentation, and that the recommendations contained therein be approved as amended. Again, the vote will be electronic. I'll ask those members without eScribe at the moment to please raise their hand if you are in favor. That's unanimous from the members that I see present. And that carries 12-0. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Karima, for your time today and for your presentation and walking us through this process. That brings us, everyone, to agenda item 6, the appointment of the chair and vice chair for the Board of Health. As we move into this process, I will just advise first on the role of the chair, just so everybody is familiar with it so that we know what we're talking about and we're all on the same page. So the role of the chair for the Board of Health really is providing leadership to the board, works with the secretary, the medical officer of health when it comes to agendas. Your responsibility to preside over meetings and the proceedings and ensure they are conducted in an appropriate and orderly manner. You monitor the board's adherence to corporate policies, assisting members to follow those policies and procedures. The chair must perform a number of duties at the beginning of the meeting, getting things started, bringing things together, recognizing guests, speakers, and members, and takes on an administrative role here with the board throughout the meeting, preserving order and decorum, managing discussion, ensuring the appropriate speakers and the rules of the procedural bylaw that we just approved are followed. During meeting, of course, discussions, allowing one speaker at a time, stating the order in which it's happening, ensuring all members have been heard who wish to address an issue. Address questions to the appropriate staff and allow discussion to continue, as of course managing meeting voting and motions, as well as any additional responsibilities of the chair between meetings, representing the Board of Health at council meetings as an example, sign correspondence, sign the minutes, monitor progress of all committee tasks, and any additional resources for members. So there's a quick overview of what that is. The way this process will go forward is I will ask for a nominee for either a councillor or member to serve as the chair of the Board of Health for the remainder of the 2022 to 2026 term. What I'll ask for is that you please say, I nominate so-and-so to serve for the remainder of this term. If there are multiple nominees, we'll create a list that will appear on the screen, and we will go from there. I will first recognize Councillor Wang.
Chair, I just have a question. Did you say that in your preamble about the term of the chair? Like how once we nominate somebody and they become a chair and vice chair, what does the succession plan look like? Or are they in for the whole 4-year term of council of the election cycle?
So at present, it would follow the election cycle. Of course, the procedures and the policies of the board can change as the board moves through its own governance review and processes. So at present, we would be nominating somebody and electing them to serve as chair for the remainder of this council term.
And
So it would
then-
currently align with the term of council.
Okay, so currently, the way that it says is that if there is a new election term, that the chair would be there for a 4-year term, is that correct?
That is currently how we have it set up, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Tattison.
Receiving nominations at this point now?
Yes, we are now open to receiving nominations.
I would like to nominate Councillor Kretsch as the chair.
So I have a nomination for Councillor Kretsch to serve as chair for the remainder of the term. Do I have a seconder for the nomination? Councillor Kassar, thank you. I'll now call, and sorry, while I open the screen to make sure I can see everybody online, are there any further nominations to serve as chair for the remainder of the term? Thank you. Recognizing Member Johnson, I would like to nominate Member Joseph for the chair. And sorry, before I move on, let me just confirm with Councillor Kretsch. Do you accept the nomination?
Yes, but if Member Joseph accepts, I'm going to withdraw.
Thank you. Do I have a, let me perhaps move to Joseph. Would you be interested in accepting the nomination, Member Joseph?
I want to appreciate the nomination. I think, practically speaking, I am more effective and impactful in ways that maybe take administrative burdens off myself. And so I think I'll decline chair, but not all administrative roles. And this is a long-winded no, but like, I just want to say, as we've proceeded and as the subcommittee, and my ability to kind of like think through the 3 or so motions that I've brought forward and that were passed, could be complicated with my kind of ramping up onboarding, understanding of administrative processes and chairing. And I'd rather, at this moment, forego this cognitive burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Joseph. So I will not call for a seconder as you are not interested. Are there any other nominations? I'll call at second time. Calling one last time for any nominations. Thank you. While it's not in my procedures, I'm actually going to call for a motion to close the nominations for chair for the remainder of this term. Can I get a mover and a seconder to close the nominations for chair of the Board of Health? I see Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Kassar. It's a procedural motion, so I'll just ask for a show of hands. All those in favor of closing nominations at this time, please raise your hand. All opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Now, as there is only one nominee for the position of chair, I will now congratulate Councillor Kretsch as chair and ask if you would like to take over and go through the nominations for vice chair, if you'd like me to proceed and take over after that.
If you don't mind, that gave me the grace to get up there and get my computer set up, and you can do the vice chair, that'd be wonderful.
While the
Thanks to everybody.
chair gathers himself and gets ready to take over the remainder of the agenda, what I will do now is entertain nominations for the appointment of vice chair for the Board of Health. And I see Councillor Tattison.
I'd like to nominate Dr. Joseph.
Presuming something here from the earlier discussion, do we have a seconder? Thank you, member. Oh, geez. Are there any further nominations for vice chair? Calling a third and last time for nominations for vice chair. Seeing none, can I get a mover and seconder to close the nominations for the vice chair role? I see Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Kassar. Procedural, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Congratulations, Member Joseph, on being elected as vice chair to the Board of Health. Looking now to Councillor Kretsch. I will hand the chair to you as you resume the remainder of the agenda.
Thanks, and thanks to everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Board of Health meeting. We're on to item 9, items for information, and the first one being 9.1, Board of Health 25017, which are the 2025 Board of Health meeting schedule. So at this point, I need a mover and seconder to receive this item. Councillor Tattison, Councillor Nan. Is there any discussion on the proposed meeting dates in front of you? Councillor Huang.
How do we reschedule? What is the process to rescheduling any of these meetings, just in case we have conflicts?
Through the chair. So once these are booked, these are put on the website through public notice to make sure the members of the public are aware of what is available. If there's a need to cancel a meeting, that's done through discussions by the secretary with the chair and vice chair. Reasons for that could be due to a conflict of members, a lack of quorum, or perhaps a lack of agenda items, all of which we issue the appropriate notice and cancel the meeting. The procedural bylaw that we recently approved does outline situations where we could call a special meeting or an emergency meeting based on that with the appropriate notices defined in the bylaw.
Thank you.
Councillor Nan.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just an inquiry about the meeting schedule indicates meeting monthly starting in September. Appreciating that, but also aware that Monday afternoons is Public Works Committee. And sometimes I trust the chair to be able to do the agenda management from that perspective, but recognizing that we'd be meeting less in an annual basis, and curious about whether or not that's been taken into account for the scheduling.
So through the chair, we did take that into account and essentially mimicked what would have been the schedule of the Public Health Subcommittee. So the dates essentially remain the same for the Board of Health. If there's a desire, again, to add more, or with discussions with public health staff, if we feel that there might be a heavy agenda, we can always look at adding a meeting in a cycle to ensure that we cover all of the necessary items.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And you have my word, Councillor Nan, that I'll do everything I can to make sure these meetings run on time. On that, I don't see any further speakers on the schedule, so we're going to do 2 different votes here. The first vote is just to receive the memo itself that we have in front of us, so I need a mover and second to receive the memo. Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Member Danko. All those in favor, show of hands to receive the memo. Wonderful. It's been received. And now we need a mover and seconder to approve the 2025 meeting schedule outlined within the memo. So I'll need a mover and seconder to approve it. Member Danko, Councillor Nan. And again, we'll do a show of hands. And I think this is an electronic vote, I believe, for the members of council. And by the way, that'll be set up for everybody at some point soon. So everyone knows they'll be able to access the electronic system. But for today, those who are not members of council indicate by show of hands. All those in favor of the meeting schedule. Okay, that's all the members I can see.
Member Chung, could you just indicate? Thank you.
And that carries 12-0. We're now on to 9.2, which is Board of Health 25011, embedding health equity methods and analysis in Hamilton public health reporting. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive this item, and then we'll get to discussion? Councillor Huang. Councillor Kassar. Any discussion on this item? I'll pause in case anyone's ruminating. Councillor Nan.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So the information report speaks to Public Health Subcommittee. So the amendment then coming to the Board of Health, it says health equity data being embedded into the section of the Public Health Subcommittee report template. I assume that that's just a shift over to the Board of Health report template?
You assume correctly. Yes, everyone was nodding when you said that, so you assume correctly, yes. And if you don't have a further question, Member Danko.
Thank you, and through the chair, just noting that it mentions when health equity data are not available to public health services, the report writer will describe public health services plan to fill the information gap. So would that come forward as a recommendation in terms of new services that would allow us to make the data more robust and collect our own data where it's not available? And is that something that would then be presented to the committee for decision-making in terms of do we proceed with that service? Because presumably there may be a financial allocation that would need to go with that. Thank you.
Through the chair. So thank you for the question. So in terms of overall, just remembering that one of our priorities has been around health equity, and that data for equity has been part of that plan as well. There is a plan underway to improve our data availability from that perspective. So when you see it in the reports, you'll either have a piece that talks to, what we're in process of doing, or it may talk to the limits that are there in terms of, we're using secondary data that is collected by somebody else and we don't have the ability to do that, and so would need new data. I would doubt that it would bring forward a specific recommendation as part of that. Rather, that would go into part of the broader plan each time. But I think as we work this through, we'll get to understand exactly how that works out and how the board is receiving that information and what it might like to see as it goes forward. So I think we'll work this through together over the next 6 to 12 months to see if that's meeting the sense of the motion that was made originally.
Thanks, Member Danko. Anybody else who wanted to speak on this? Not seeing anyone, so we will go now to a show of hands vote to receive this memo. All those in favor? That's everybody. Thank you. We're on to 9.3, which is Board of Health 25013, which is the feasibility of implementing wastewater surveillance citywide. Right now, need a mover and seconder to receive this item. Moved by Councillor Taddison. Seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. At this time, we're going to go for discussion. I'm just going to look at my speakers list, then look around at everyone. I see Councillor Taddison first. Councillor Taddison, then we're going to have Member Danko. Thank you.
Just to the good doctor. Dr. Richardson, I should be specific. Sorry, they're all good doctors here. It says basically that the recommendations, we're waiting for evidence-based recommendations that will help ensure any future implementation is both cost-effective and aligned with public health needs at the local level. Can I ask who's doing that evidence-based research right now?
Through the chair, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Liu, actually, because he is involved with this more directly.
Thank you to the councillor, to the chair. So there's a number of organizations that are undergoing research in this area. It includes work being done at the federal level, led by the Public Health Agency of Canada, but in collaboration with a number of academic institutions to perform this work on an ongoing basis. And there are also local universities that do engage in some of this work, but not projects that we are currently actively involved with.
So in light of that, I'm asking, why couldn't Hamilton be a part of the ongoing research?
To the councillor through the chair. To this point, Hamilton has not been included in the larger federal programs or research that has been funded and operated through the Public Health Agency of Canada. We had engaged in the past through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, where that program had been operating through the provincial ministry through the pandemic, and certainly had provided input to that work through that time, and would continue to be open to engaging in research should there be a institution or organization who wish to have us participate.
Okay, I guess final question. If we were to participate, wouldn't the collection of our wastewater data, wouldn't that help the people doing the research? Wouldn't the more information be better as opposed to just operating in a void around Hamilton?
To the councillor through the chair, this has been an area that has progressed fairly significantly through the pandemic, and I think there's still a lot of interest to determine what's the most appropriate level of government, place, jurisdiction through which to operate such a surveillance program, and the utility of it in terms of comparability between jurisdictions, I think, is certainly an area of open question or interest, where we participate or engage in research. It is generally research that is led and funded and supported through the appropriate research channels, and oftentimes we would engage where requested or as a collaboration between institutions for projects, including the support, but those things are generally led by researchers, academic institutions.
Thank you for the clarifications.
Dr. Richardson, you wanted to add something?
I was just going to add the existing work that's being done through the Public Health Agency of Canada and the National Collaborating Centre for Infectious Diseases already covers about 51% of the population that's served by sewage systems across Canada, and Southern Ontario is already heavily represented in that piece, and so that's a piece where we look at the work that's going on, and if it was something new that didn't exist, we'd be encouraging others, as Brendan was saying, as Dr. Liu was saying, to engage in that research, but again, be looking for funding to come through agencies like Public Health Agency of Canada, rather than doing that ourselves. So it's not a piece where we feel there's a gap currently that's there. I think as we move forward, really trying to understand what it all means. There's 6 work groups that are in place under the Public Health Agency of Canada, and one of them is about data interpretation and what does it all mean. And so I think once they sort of work those pieces through, we would want to take the appropriate role in that. But I think the existing research network and funding is doing a good job of moving that agenda forward.
Thanks. Now on to Member Danko, followed by Member Alex Wilson.
Thank you, and through the chair, appreciate the work done to investigate the feasibility. Wastewater detection certainly is promising, but as mentioned in the report, even when you had respiratory wastewater data available, it didn't provide new information that led to a different actions. And I think given the financial constraints that you have, and that we have under public health, and given the lack of understanding of, so what does it all mean, as mentioned, I think it's really prudent to wait at this time to proceed with any further action. I was wondering if you could give me some clarity on how we would receive recommendations that were evidence-based coming out of the research that was mentioned, that would allow us to consider when it might be appropriate for local implementation, or when it might be appropriate to take additional steps. How would that feed back to public health and then to this committee, or this board, sorry?
Through the chair. So that sort of work that goes on, it generally, there's a huge range of research, as one can imagine, going on into what changes would be coming forward. And so that would be usually a more operational level piece about how it fits into our surveillance systems. And so staff would be reflecting on that and looking at how we would update our surveillance dashboards? Should that be done locally here in Hamilton, or update in some other way the kind of work that we're presenting on the internet that says, this is what's happening with respiratory virus season, or this is what's happening with the new virus that's detected. And so that would be dealt with by staff at the operational level. It wouldn't usually come back through to the board in terms of that sort of surveillance. Rather, you would hear about a surveillance product that was going forward and that it was now available as part of a communications update that you would receive during the course of business.
Thanks very much. And now we're on to Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'm just trying to understand the procurement comment in the piece. So it sounds, not disagreeing with any comments said so far, but just echoing up on Councillor Tadison's point, there's lots of folks who might be interested in having a data set. It seemed like McMaster University proactively said, hey, here's what it would cost for us in a fee-for-service arrangement. So they're clearly thinking, oh, we could see some value in this. If we were getting a fee-for-service, would it be possible to just understand if, let's hypothetically, McMaster, a different institutional partner comes forward and says, outside of a fee-for-service model or within a data sharing agreement or something like that, a new opportunity comes forward. I'm just wondering, that's not here, that's not what is in front of us today, but how does our procurement policy allow or not allow or enable that flexibility, creativity to maybe find a compromise if one exists within a lower dollar figure or within kind of understanding the financial rate sizing that also needs to happen? Just trying to understand what flexibility exists in the path forward.
Through the chair, I think if I'm understanding the question, which I think is, if there was a desire to move forward, what would we do? How would we go about procuring that? And so we would follow the procurement bylaw. We do follow the city's procurement bylaws now. That's currently the case under the service level agreement that will be developed. I would say that should continue. It's a nice, robust process that we don't need to duplicate. And so we would have to go out for an RFP knowing that this is at that dollar level in terms of what we're dealing with, and then see who those were that responded to that procurement as we went forward. It's a little, we do get involved, and I should just again say, we do get involved, as Dr. Liu said, in research projects. Those are usually things that we do collaboratively in kind, and so we'll have staff help support that project. The majority of granting is found by the academic partner, and that is flowed through that academic institution. And then we partner with them on the pieces that are relevant to our particular work. So we have had in the past, as happened with Ottawa, a situation where, of course, no dollars flowed through here. They were funded by others. We collaborated with them in terms of receiving the data, understanding what it worked, and our public works collaborated with them in supplying samples. So we've often done those more collaborative things. If we had a partner that came forward and wanted to continue that arrangement, we would continue that arrangement as we go forward on this subject as well.
Just repeating, so if we're doing it as a fee-for-service model, it goes through procurement. If, like, we need to ask someone to do this analysis for us, we have to go through a procurement process. If other organizations come forward and say, hey, we'd like to collaborate, it's not necessarily in the financial realm, we're not paying them for an analysis service, they're saying, we are getting something out of this. That's the bit that I'm just trying to understand, that maybe that Ottawa model where they have grant money or external money, does that still then we put out a procurement, or is that something within that we regularly do collaboration kind of comment? Just trying to understand procedurally, what does it take to initiate that collaboration if there was someone interested, if that came forward? And then that'll be it from me. Thank you.
Through the chair. So these are collaborations, as I was saying, that we often do. Essentially, we have a research policy that applies. It's a staff policy that applies to the work we do. It's required under those standards that Karima was mentioning earlier. And so people generally approach staff. Usually it's somebody who has an ongoing relationship. For example, around infectious diseases, we have ongoing relationships with many of those at McMaster who do that kind of work. So they'd approach the leadership within that area directly and just talk about what was looked at, was wanted to be pursued. If it fit with the particular work of public health, we would look to move forward and see how it would need to comply with that policy. And if we had the resources to do that work with them, sometimes still even the in-kind kind of pieces are too much from a resource perspective, but often it fits well with what we're doing in any case. And so we would consider that and then make a decision about moving forward with that collaboration. I should just say we get many, many, many research requests for things that aren't part of our core business, and we do turn most of those down.
Thanks. I now see Member Kirkby, and I'm on the list last, and I'll hand the chair over to, oh, Member Joseph also wants to go. Okay, I'll be after Member Joseph. Go ahead, Member Kirkby.
Thanks so much for bringing this back. I just have a question around the financial cost component of this and the focus being on what it would cost to run the program, but looking to, is there a comparison in terms of not running the program, so what the cost would be to the healthcare system, or to, you know, if we know there's a larger outbreak, for instance, based on wastewater, or a larger number of cases versus how many are showing up in clinical practices, like what the cost might be. I imagine that's a very complicated number to measure, but just wondering if potentially with any research that's underway, if that might be something that's coming out of the research, like is it cost effective to actually run this in order to help prevent further outbreak or disease? Thanks.
To the member through the chair, that's I think a very good question that it would be very helpful to have some research to answer. I think to this point, as outlined in the report, it's unclear what action would be taken as a consequence that would necessarily prevent or avert outcomes. And so in the absence of specific action taken in light of that specific data to avert a certain outcome, it's really not possible to assess what the implication or cost, because it's unclear what would be prevented.
Was it not clear, though, through COVID-19, like through the pandemic, that the action was that we were able to know that there was more, I guess, out in community, more COVID out in the community or circulating than was known? So then there's action around communicating that to the public, around, you know, being more careful. I'm just curious about what, I mean, that would be one piece of it, right?
To the member through the chair, so absolutely we see value and continue to report publicly in terms of levels of respiratory virus transmission for COVID-19 and other respiratory viruses. What is unclear is how different, or what additional sort of information that wastewater might provide that provides a different assessment or a different opportunity for action as compared to the data that we continue to report or publicly and have available.
Thank you, Member Kirkby. Member Joseph.
Thank you, through the chair. I had a similar thought about the report, and I appreciate the report and the response to the motion that triggered it. And when I read it, I saw an appreciation and respect for the knowledge that comes about from surveillance data. And as a researcher, of course, I can share that research is always needed and will always be needed. And there will always be a need for more. What it triggers and what's done with knowledge can't be predicted without the knowledge. I see this report outlining a number of those acknowledgements, that there's some importance to the collaborative piece of having earlier surveillance data, wastewater data, alongside the other surveillance measures. And then also the absence of the kind of cost-benefit analysis and the feasibility data that associates the kind of costs for with the costs against, which is, you know, a reference to the member Kirkby's comments around, could we leave this a bit more open such that we could maybe pay some attention to the costs of not doing so? And you might look at $55,000 or $100,000 as some costly measure that seems maybe that we don't have money for. And when looking at a kind of broader picture of an outbreak, in a condition where our global world is changing environmentally and otherwise, and there's global impacts to changes in vaccination practices and policies, that those risks might be in the millions or even more. So I think without that, it would be hard for me to agree with a kind of understanding pseudo recommendation that maybe we don't do anything at this time. When I also read in the report that there is lots happening at this time and will be happening. I think that what we might choose to agree upon is that at this particular moment, we may choose not to make a decision for and against this, but rather stay open to a collaborative approach that allows us to entertain the research and the data coming forward via broader national projects, that allows us to entertain proposals coming from researchers to do some of this work, that also allows us to stay open to the idea that this is necessary and important, and why these $55,000 to $100,000 something costs seem like they're not in our budget, that we haven't yet assessed the cost of outbreak response for at least the infectious diseases named in the document itself. So I don't know if that turns into an amendment or maybe a motion that's brought forward that someone writes, or maybe me, next meeting, where we continue to stay vigilant around this and not kind of throw it out or suggest that this feasibility process is complete, which in my opinion, it's not. It's been raised as not.
Thanks. I was going to speak to the motion, but I'm not going to now just because people have already said what I was going to say. So I'm just going to try and stick handle this from a procedural perspective, just to give everybody an idea of what the kind of options we have in front of us are based on what I'm hearing people saying. So we have two options in front of us, really. We have many options, but two that are coalescing from the discussion. Number one is we can put forward a recommendation from the Board of Health to the mayor that you consider this as part of the 2026 budget with this funding. We can do that anytime we want to do that, but we have to be mindful of the fact that there's a timeline there, right? So if we do it suddenly in the middle of the budget process, it's unlikely to be approved. So we want to get those kinds of things in. We'd have to go through some process to do so. There'd be a motion. Secondly, we could also ask for a report back with further information about these research projects, right, in maybe a 6-month or a year's time from now, to determine where we think things are going. Have there been collaborations? Have there been advancements? Has there been research? So we can answer some of these questions and then make a decision then. So any time period people choose, they could say we want to have it in 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever the point is, that's a possibility available to us as well. And we can entertain either of those motions under the motion section because they're motions related to the report, or frankly, at this time because the report's on the floor. So that's kind of where we're at now. We can entertain other kinds of motions as well, but anyway, looking around the room, we have a series of second-time speakers at this time, so I'm going to refer to them in the order I saw them. Councillor Chattison, Member Danko, and Councillor Alex Wilson. Councillor Chattison?
I just wanted to throw out the option of a possible defer for a month to consider it as a body here and come back and discuss it. I think the meeting is the end of July.
I will say this is a report for information, so there's no decision to be made today to defer. There's no deferral. So we receive it for information. Anyone can act whenever they feel like acting at this meeting, right? So we can have a meeting in the future on it that we comes back and says, oh, we want to have a motion. But the clerk wants to clarify. Please do.
And maybe, Chair, what I'd recommend, if that's where the board is maybe feeling that we're not ready today but would like to make one tomorrow, to your second point, it might be more pertinent to receive this and just direct staff to come back with a report that has specific recommendations and or just come back with options at a later date, which could be July, could be later. It all depends on the ability of staff to respond, of course.
Indeed. Thanks, Councillor Chattison. Member Danko, then Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you, through the chair. Appreciate the discussion. I just want to go back to what Dr. Richardson had mentioned in response to my question. And basically, like, work continues from this point. It just will be more operational in nature. So I heard a commitment that our public health services will be looking at surveillance dashboards, looking at updating them, looking at the vast amount of research that's happening to inform our practices, so that we would receive updates as those new findings are incorporated into best practices based on the evidence. So I wonder if I could just ask, through you, Mr. Chair, if staff might like to respond to some of the commentary to clarify that a bit further.
Through the chair. So I think what I'm hearing from the discussion is that there's a bit missing from the report. And what was missing from the report was what other costs might be averted. I'm trying to paraphrase Member Kirkby's question, but what other costs might have been averted if this sort of monitoring was in place. And so just on that particular point, as Dr. Luce had said, we don't believe there are any costs that could have been averted. And I understand how that may not have been clear in the report when we commented on, we don't see any public health action related to the specifics of that monitoring at this time. In the future, however, that could change. I mean, that could happen with any piece of research that relates to the vast breadth of what we do, that things could change in terms of how, we might need additional pieces here and that things could help. And we do, as I mentioned earlier, continue to monitor things and would bring things back. So I guess I'm not clear what it is staff might be asked for at this juncture, knowing that we would come back, through the usual processes, reporting about how we change the operational work that we do, what it is that the board might want or need that's different. If there's something different in the way that staff are preparing their reports, it would be very helpful to know what it is that the board would systematically be seeking, or is there some additional piece of information in this particular case?
Yes, I think you answered Member Danko's question. I think no one's put anything forward yet to ask for anything, so we can't really respond to that. If somebody puts forward a motion, I guess we can talk about it then. But right now, I think what people are saying is that they want to potentially consider doing something in the future. Councillor Alex Wilson.
Yeah, thank you. I was just adding, we can receive an information report, prepare motions as notices for future meetings as well. Like they don't have to, action can be disjointed from the report. That's all I was suggesting. So for example, I'll just be very vocal. One of the things I'd like to do is just, have a conversation with some of our engagement folks, et cetera. Just understand how we're looking at partnerships, talk to some of the folks at the Board of Health table, get a better understanding of those research agreements. I don't feel like if I wanted to make a motion that lane of collaboration, I have the necessary knowledge. So that's where I'm at, is I have some homework I'd like to personally do digesting this information. If other folks have a direction, though, happy to that. Just kind of sharing where I'm at as we're a new board, kind of thinking about how we make these decisions. Thank you.
Member Jacob, you're on the list. Okay, not on the list. It's okay. I had it on my list here, but you're not on the list. I don't see further speakers at this time. Oh, Member Joseph, go ahead.
Through the chair, I think my queries about the report were, as you clarified, there is a belief that there are no adverse costs to not having wastewater data at the moment. And if that is also an evidence-based claim, and it's clear in the document, I've missed it, I think, that would be helpful in terms of like next steps and what I do in terms of response, or what any of us do in terms of recommendations or motions.
So I think that was a question. Are you asking a question there, or just
I think
clarifying?
Well, it's a clarification question, if that is the claim being made in response to the query.
Through the chair, yes. This is what was meant when we laid out in the report. I think it's the second from last paragraph before the consultations, that at this point, it does not provide public health services with actionable data that goes beyond what we already have through the other sources of data that are laid out in the report. And so at this point, there isn't something we can do that's different because of our experience with looking at the data. And based on the discussions that we've been a part of, both provincially and nationally, around the surveillance program and what we continue to hear about from the province and from the federal government about what they're doing with the research work. And so that's an evidence-based piece in terms of we don't at this point have something different that we could do based on having that data. That might change, could change tomorrow, but that's where it stands as of today.
Okay, thank you very much. So just want a brief summary before we receive this item and give you some future paths ahead, just so you know where we are. The original mover of this motion, I think, was Member Lennox, who's not here any longer. I seconded it. I think what her intention at that time was trying to have public reporting of this data through the Board of Health. And so we've heard in the report from staff about that. At this point, we're receiving this for information only. If people would like to bring a motion forward, you can do so in the future anytime you wish. On that, all those in favor of receiving the item? It's a show of hands vote. That's everyone. The item is received. Now we're on to 9.4, Board of Health Representative Update respecting the 2025 Alpha Annual General Meeting and Conference. And before I turn to Councillor Cassar and Member Kirkby, who both attended, I want to call upon Dr. Richardson to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't know that I need to make much of an introduction, but this is consistent with the new Board of Health travel policy that you just approved today, that when members go away to meetings, that they would come back and provide a brief overview of what they've learned or experienced, gathered from those events. And so very much appreciate both Councillor Cassar and Member Kirkby agreeing that though that travel was approved before the policy existed, I think the meeting was a very valuable one. And so I think they do have some updates to share.
Go ahead, Councillor Cassar, and then Member Kirkby.
Thank you, Chair Crutch. Yeah, as was indicated, this was the Alpha Conference, the Association of Local Public Health Agencies, thank you, in Ontario, from June 18th to the 20th. So I attended along with Member Kirkby and Drs. Richardson and Liu. So what I'll share here is a consolidation of kind of our notes and conversations. I'll start speaking for the first couple of days, and I'll pass it to Member Kirkby to speak to the final day. So the first day was on the agenda was 2 mobile workshops. Only one actually happened because of the weather. And it was a tour, a walking tour of the St. Lawrence Market and the link between food and health. A very fascinating overview of the history of the market and several iterations of it and how it and the city and City Hall grew around the market. And just some fascinating facts, not to go into great detail, but on the market originally with butchers and the lack of drainage, and the implications on public health there, and how we've obviously come a long way, and lots of history there. Thursday was all delegates and a number of speakers. Kind of overview of the day was just there was a lot of time invested around talking about reconciliation. There was definitely an Indigenous theme to the speakers, which I'll get to in more detail, and just public health engagement with those communities. That was reflected in the presentations and the resolutions, which I'll speak to at the AGM. It was really focused around engagement and meaningful relationships. And when I speak to the debate on the resolutions, you can see very much that it was much in progress, as a couple of the resolutions were referred back to the Board of Alpha for more work. So we started with Mark Forget from Makatu Workshops. His talk was about fostering understanding, reconciliation, and Indigenous connections. That was the keynote address, and it was also a workshop. So while he was speaking on the calls to action, 18 to 24, which focused on health and related to Indigenous health, we were building a medicine shield, also referred to as a medicine wheel, or sometimes inappropriately, I guess, as a dream catcher. So we were working on that together while he was talking. So it was a very unique way to take in that information. We later in that day got into the AGM and the resolutions. So there were 4 resolutions in total. The 2 that were carried were 1, integrating the Ontario Early Adversity and Resilience Framework into public health practice to improve population health outcomes. The resolution there was that the Association of Local Public Health Agencies endorses the Ontario Early Adversity and Resilience Framework as a comprehensive resource for public health practice in Ontario. And the second one that carried was around preventing heavy metal exposure from contaminated spices, cosmetics, ceremonial powders, and products sold for natural health purposes. So the call there was for Health Canada to take action on population-level heavy metal exposure linked to the consumption of those imported spices, cosmetics, and ceremonial powders. So that carried. The two motions that I mentioned that were referred back to the board, well, the first one was Indigenous representation on boards of health. So the resolutions were that the Alpha call upon the Government of Ontario to ensure Indigenous representation on all local boards of health, and that representatives be verifiably Indigenous, grounded in community, with lived experience from the territory in which they will represent on a board of health. As I mentioned off the top, there was lots of debate on that. Ultimately, I think where it landed from my perspective was there needed to be more consultation with Indigenous communities, as we sort of had the conversation in here about potential representation municipally, using the idea of nothing about us without us. So that was sent back to the board, and I imagine will come back in a future Alpha meeting. The second one was strengthening the public health and judicial response to the opioid toxicity crisis in Ontario, with a focus on protecting Indigenous communities. That also got referred back to the board for more work. The resolutions there were that the association, that Alpha reaffirms its commitment to protecting Indigenous communities by advocating for a coordinated approach to the opioid crisis, integrating education, prevention, harm reduction, treatment, recovery, and enforcement, and that Alpha supports the role of enforcement and the criminal justice system as essential components of a comprehensive public health strategy to address the opioid crisis. Again, lots of conversation there. Happy to talk more detail about it with any members offline, but ultimately that got referred back to the board for more work. There was also some speakers from Ontario Health and Public Health Ontario. We had Dr. Chris Simpson, Chief Medical Executive from Ontario Health, and Michael Sherrar, President and Chief Executive Officer on Public Health Ontario. Lots of topics covered, lots of graphical material on progress on a number of metrics. Key takeaway for me was that the lack of vaccinations and resulting impacts has become incredibly costly to the medical system, creating a diversion of limited resources that impact care in other areas of healthcare. I know this has been in the news, so it won't be a surprise to anyone, but creating delays in surgery and other care slowing down, being less effective, more stress on healthcare professionals, more expensive to administer, and worse outcomes. And what struck me was one fact that was shared was, we know that hospitals have been over capacity, and what was shared was that having a hospital at 106% of its capacity versus 110 is a big difference. So that actually 106% is actually manageable. And to make that difference, to close that gap, hitting vaccination targets can actually get us a big part of the way there. So just to focus on the importance of vaccinations and the impact of dropping vaccination rates has had. We also heard from Dr. Nicole Blackman, Chief Operating Officer, Indigenous Primary Healthcare Council. The talk was about public health and engagement with Indigenous communities. Key takeaway there was that public health, of course, is population health, and not a surprise to anyone here, and that Indigenous populations have significantly poorer health outcomes on many metrics, from cardiovascular disease, TB, depression, postpartum depression, infant mortality, suicide rates, and so on. And the challenge issued to all of us was, as leaders in the public health system, how are we actively demonstrating or planning to demonstrate a sustained and genuine commitment to improving health outcomes with Indigenous communities? We also heard from Sabine Matheson, and anyone who has heard Sabine talk, very, very engaging speaker. Their presentation was entitled Game of Speeches from the Throne, so focusing on both provincial politics and the federal changes we've seen recently. There's some advice on government relations and to make sure we're thinking about it as what we want from other levels of government, and having a plan to do that and building relationships over time. A key takeaway here was this contrast between what the public says and wants and desires from healthcare, as in reducing wait times, having more access to GPs, which takes away the focus from the public healthcare system. And the fact that the government is responding to that very vocal need and maybe not putting as much focus on public health and the upstream impacts that public health can contribute to reducing. We also heard from Chief Medical Officer Dr. Kieran Moore. on a whole number of issues, a lot going on in the environment right now. Some notes were the importance of local voices to get one record for immunizations and more broadly speaking, one health record. So that work is ongoing. There was also talk about the relationship between provincial dental health programs and the Canadian Dental Care Plan and the implications that can have locally, and also about funding. So there's an acknowledgement of the pressure on local public health budgets because of growing population and growing needs, and the funding formula is under review. There was conversation throughout a number of the speakers about how we don't really understand the cost of executing public health in the community, whether that's doing inspection or otherwise, and the need to actually be able to demonstrate that financial need and to, with correlating that with a growing population in order to have appropriate funding. And then also conversation around the healthcare system and how brittle it is during the virus season, so the first few months of the year. And the importance, referring back to what I mentioned before, is mitigating the surge of patients that gets healthcare facilities over capacity, and also acknowledgement of the very successful work to implement RSV immunizations, and I think Hamilton is a good case study of that, and ongoing work to expand the program. So that was the Thursday. I'll pass it over to Member Kirkby to speak to Friday in the Board of Health section meeting.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make a quick comment too on the Wednesday. The mobile tour was really great to kind of walk through and see the kind of public health impact on the infrastructure and in the city. And particularly the archiving of public health records is really, they drew on those and brought a bunch of those resources out to show us throughout the day. And that was really just a good, I don't know, lesson or something interesting to think about in Hamilton too, in terms of how we're archiving or sharing the information based on the public health history and how important it is to, you know, how we operate now is really interesting to see that on the Wednesday. So the Friday, the first session was on the front lines. So that was leaders from across public health units that represented dietitians, public health inspectors, dentistry and nursing, just providing some highlights or commentary on their current work. And really one of the big focuses of that day was demonstrating the value of these foundational public health areas in the face of funding constraints. And this came through really specifically with dietitians and the public health inspectors. So the Ontario Dietitians representative was talking about funding cuts and how those are really going to lead to growing health costs and worth outcomes in that area. And then just during some networking time after that session, some boards of health representatives were sharing how they're already really feeling the crunch, and particularly around the work that dietitians do within their public health units, just the impact of cuts and feeling like their work isn't valued in that area. So that was really good insight from that group. And then in terms of the public health inspectors and what they were bringing forward, they were talking about how the growing population is not leading to proportional funding increases. So there's a need to use data to make a case of the cost per inspection, and that we lack a solid understanding of the cost to complete these public health inspections. So that was also interesting to hear across the different health units, and in particular in rural areas as well, and how the amount of travel and going in between and just like all those costs that we don't necessarily consider. And just one comment on that portion in general, there was a lack of kind of discussion around equity or how, you know, a more equitable approach could be applied or integrated into those foundational public health functions. I just noticed it was really missing from that discussion, particularly with regard to analysis or access to services. The next portion of the morning was legally speaking. So Alpha's legal counsel was brought in to talk about financial obligations of Board of Health. So the conversation this morning, some of the questions that Member Danko had were really relevant to that discussion. So James Lanuri, who's the legal counsel to Alpha, reviewed the financial obligations of Board of Health and reviewed how the Health Promotion and Protection Act deals with obligations regarding finances between a municipality and Board of Health. But boards of health also operate within this broader financial and administrative framework established by the Municipal Act. So really talking about how that ensures accountability and transparency, and also some duplication overlap between those acts as well. So I think navigating them is tricky and understanding all the different pieces and components. And so there wasn't a lot of detail. It was fairly high level, not a lot of detail around how the financial obligations differ between different types of boards of health. So one of the takeaways from that session for me was, how does, it might be good for us as a Hamilton Board of Health to dig into that a little more, maybe through some training or education around, what's the semi-autonomous board of health, how those financial pieces all fall into place, and really related also to the discussion we had here this morning. I think it ties in to information that maybe we need a little bit more information on to operate effectively. And then the last presentation was around AI. So that was interesting how AI impacts public health. So there was discussion around MarTech's law. So how that means that tech changes exponentially very fast, but organizations move more slowly. So how do you keep up and manage that difference? That in Wellington, Dufferin, Guelph Public Health Unit, they had a public health bot that was very effective at reducing administrative demands, and then nurses are freed up to do really that value-added work and the really valuable work for the community. They mentioned a McKinsey 2018 report that said throwing more labor at the problem is not the solution. It was also mentioned that IT departments are not the department of the people to be leading the AI work, that innovation really needs to be driven by operations and then supported by IT, so really understanding and figuring out what the AI impact is on operations. And that AI is not the answer, it's really just a toolkit in a toolbox. Some other questions that came up in that presentation were, how might AI contribute to or combat mis, dis, or malinformation? I think we've had some discussion around this table around misinformation and disinformation as well, so it's an interesting piece to explore. And then also some of the challenges around equity when we're looking at AI, so who might get left behind, and just a commentary on how AI can either reduce or widen service gaps. So you have to be really careful with this application. And I also just wanted to share that there's an alpha AI and digital solutions working group. So I'm not sure what the membership looks like right now, but tapping into that if anyone's interested, members around this table would be interesting as well. And then just in closing, that day there was a reminder from Loretta Ryan, who's the ED of Alpha, that there's many resources available on the Alpha Board of Health members portal. So I wanted to share that here as well. That includes presentations, position papers, reports. They're all easily accessible. You just sign up as a member on the Alpha site. And another takeaway I had just from the whole session and just being at this conference was that Hamilton doesn't have representation at the Alpha board or committees. So I think that's something also as members we might want to consider, being more involved potentially at that level. Especially as we've now moved into this new semi-autonomous board and thought about the inclusion of community members for better representation, and some of the lessons that we might be able to share, some of the knowledge and kind of what we're doing here would be, I think, really valuable across the board. So that's it. Yeah, it was great to attend.
Yeah, thank you. And just one quick summary comment, I guess, to sum it up. There was a banner in the meeting rooms that said, "Public health helps save your life today. You just didn't know it." And I think that speaks to, well, obviously the importance of public health, but also to what I alluded to earlier on this dichotomy of illness care, downstream versus upstream public health care, and the fact that there's so much focus from the public on the downstream and not the upstream. So it's a bit of a marketing challenge too in education. So I think that's just something for us to contemplate.
I'll just supplement what you said at the end there, Member Kirkby, to say that I checked in with the folks at Alpha to ask them about board representation. As far as I know, there's still a vacancy for our region, but it's a vacancy for a one-year term. I'd asked if they could provide the information with respect to when the dates for the board meetings will be. And they didn't have that information handy, so I said, well, without that information, it'd be difficult for people to commit to whether or not they could run if they weren't sure if they could make it for the dates. So I think we're still waiting on the information for the dates for those board meetings. When I get that, we can pass it along here, and then people can certainly put their name forward. And there's a sort of by-election or appointment process that exists through the existing board because we've missed the formal election process that happens in public. On that note, just wanted to also say that there was no agenda review for this meeting today, just to be transparent, because there was no chair. So I wasn't at an agenda review for this meeting. Had it been, I would have asked if we could find a way to get a written report from both of you, just to be more accessible. I think there's a lot of great information in there. people listening to it as you're talking may not be processing it, may not be getting all the information. So in future, we're going to make sure that folks can do a written report and maybe even check back in with you to see if you can provide one that we can just add to the future agenda so we can just have it there for receipt. I'm seeing nods from the two of you, so if you wouldn't mind doing that, we'll figure out a format that makes sense. This is a new activity for us, so thanks for your patience. On that, seeing no further speakers on this item, we're going to have a mover and seconder to receive the update. Moved by Councillor Huang, seconded by Member Danko. All those in favor of receiving the update? That's everybody. We're now on to item 13, and there's nothing to do here today because I've checked with Councillor Taddison, who will be leaving the motion on the agenda, beach water quality testing and advisory protocols at Binbrook Conversation Area, as a notice of motion. You already have it on the agenda. We'll speak to it at the next meeting. Now we're on to the second last item on our agenda, bylaws. So that's just us approving and ratifying the things that happened today. You can see the list of bylaws there. Can I have somebody move and second the approval of today's bylaws? Moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Huang. And this will also be a vote by show of hands. All those in favor of the bylaws for today? Great. That's everybody. Those carry. That's our last item, technically. Today's meeting is adjourned at 11:20. See you again this month on July 28th.